Welcome to BTN Plus on this Monday night. Smoke is on the minds of Minnesotans yet again as we are under another air quality alert this summer. This one to expire tomorrow, we think. And we need to talk about Canada. And to do so, we brought in Danny Spiewak, our political journalist here at CARE. Thanks for coming on, Danny.
Thanks for having me, Jana. Always good to be here.
And Danny's got a direct line to Canada. And so what brings us to this discussion is the air quality threat that we're under yet again, and another call from a Republican lawmaker in our state asking Canada to do something about it. So set us up. Where do we get?
Sure. So as many may be familiar, obviously the Canadian wildfires have been historic. One of their worst years on record in terms of how dry and just how many fires they've had. That's been pouring smoke into our skies, not just us in Minnesota, but really all across the upper Midwest. It's kind of a regional thing for a lot of us, and unfortunately has ruined a lot of summers and a lot of ways, a lot of great, beautiful days that you can't go outside with young kids or older parents, that kind of thing.
Those are all true things.
Yeah, absolutely. So as many have probably seen, there were calls from Republican congressional members, the GOP delegation in Minnesota, telling Canada that they needed to get their act together and deal with forest management and, basically stop these fires. And, Canada shot back, basically saying, look, you're not looking at the root cause, which is the warming climate and climate change, which is making our jobs much more difficult in trying to respond to these in these huge rural areas of these burning fires that we're trying our best. And U.S. Resources are coming across the border to help, and a lot of very heroic firefighters have been trying to help the situation. And so we've had all that over the summer, that conversation. And then now this month, Republican Representative Eliot Engin, who is part of 4 different Republican state lawmakers from upper Midwest states, including Minnesota. He's the representative from Minnesota. And they sent a letter to the International Joint Commission, which is the IJC, which is basically kind of has jurisdiction on both sides of the border with environmental issues. And then the EPA, basically asking for a review of Canada's wildfire management. And so that's where we stand. They've asked for a review and kind of the same line of questioning of forest management and the response times from emergency responders and that kind of thing is all in the letter.
When that congressional letter came out with our Republican delegation, it seems like it was a couple of months ago now, it was largely viewed as this is political, this is serious yet not serious, kind of a shot across the bow, and Canada responded in a similar fashion with kind of some political teeth. But we wanted to focus on Representative Engin's letter with others because they're going to the IJC, and that truth that we have had some miserable days this summer, and we're in the metro area, up north even worse. So let's parse out some of the actual issues for the folks watching tonight. Is there anything Canada could do to get this smoke out of the air?
Well, it's an interesting question, and there are actually a lot of the same line of questioning within Canada. If you just do a kind of a search of Canadian media and you just look at what different people are saying, the head of the Fire Chiefs Association in Canada, for example, is calling on the government to do more in terms of maybe creating a wildfire agency to improve the coordination of response and that sort of thing. And so there are people within the country saying, okay, we do need to look at this and, look at what are ways that we could mitigate the impacts. And that was what the letter here from the Minnesota lawmaker and others asked for as well, was a review of practices, wildfire management, like I mentioned, response times. But the difficult part about it is when you ask, most of the leading experts that study this that are way smarter than us. I spoke to the forest ecology director at the University of Minnesota, who's written extensively on this and, knows wildfires, back and forth. And he said, the real issue is just how hot and dry it has gotten. And because the climate has gotten so much drier over the years that there's really not a lot Canada can actually do to mitigate this. In terms of the forest management, a lot of these fires have really been happening in these rural areas, very dry, remote areas where it's hard to, first of all, get emergency responders there, get them to fight the fires, but also just to get a handle on it. Lightning strikes have caused a lot of these fires as well. And so there's not a whole lot, he said, that Canada can really do. It's kind of more of an existential issue of how do you handle climate change moving forward. And unfortunately, he said, if we had addressed it 30 years ago, then perhaps we could have stopped this. But he said there's not practically really anything that Canada can do right now to stop it.
So much of what we see, too, is about heeding to warnings 30 years ago that didn't have a consequence that people could see, feel, and smell. And now we're seeing perhaps that consequence and saying we have to deal with the issue at hand, but we could have done something before.
Yeah, and it's hard too because I feel like the letters that some of the lawmakers have sent, could be in good faith in terms of people out there want to know what's going on. Just a regular person on the street is like, why is Canada burning like this? I mean, we have wildfires here, but it's just to the extent of what's happening in Canada. People do have answers, they do have questions and they want answers about what could potentially be done because it's a huge impact to us. So I don't think necessarily there's anything wrong with asking the question, but just what has I think been criticized from some has been that a lot of the letters have failed to even mention, sort of the warming climate, which has been sort of the elephant in the room.
This is maybe a silly question, Danny, but are Canadians experiencing the same kind of terrible smoky air this summer as we are?
Yeah, I know in Toronto they've had a lot of issues with that, and obviously they've had fatalities also. So it's really been a national tragedy in terms of what they've been dealing with. And so it's been a lot. Yeah, there have been a lot of American firefighters that have gone over there, and so they are really all hands on deck in the middle of a crisis right now.
I ask that because while we do have consequences here, they are having them in their own country as well. So it's not like they're just going scot-free here without smoke and it's all coming to us. So it's not really their problem. It's two countries' problem.
Right. Yeah. It's really, and it's a global issue. It's so it just happens to be. And then we're in the middle of it because we're in Minnesota. So of course we kind of take on the brunt of it, which is different for people in other, if you have family or friends visiting from other areas, sometimes you have to kind of explain to them, this is not just once a summer. This is 10 to 12 days where you either have to limit being outdoors or not going outside. It's a significant impact.
Did the person that you spoke with today at the U or any of the Canadians that you've spoken with over the last several weeks think that there could be anything done this summer to lessen any more impact going into warm months like, we're already in August and September? Or because I've heard our meteorologists say, this is far from over for this summer.
Not really. And what you hear a lot about in terms of could they have better forest management, there's a way to potentially take a look at that. But as I talked to the Lee Freilich from the U of M today, he mentioned, the scale of what you'd have to do and the amount of people it would take and workers just to get the millions and millions of acres under, managed, it would be a long process. Right. And he said it would burn anyway. So he said it's not such a simple fix as just we got to do a better job managing it. The terrain, the remoteness of it, the makeup of what's there, all makes it very difficult.
I recall perhaps 3 weeks ago, Belinda Jensen, our chief meteorologist here at CARE, mentioned on the air when talking about the wildfire forecast or the smoke forecast, just that very fact that where these fires are burning, there are no roads. I mean, this is going to be aerial or nothing. You can't get in there. So just to give you like a bit of context into it's not just we can send firefighters in with hoses. This isn't that simple.
Right. Yeah. And just the amount of fires that are raging right now, too. It's just been a nightmare for them trying to get their handle on this.
And they are fighting them now, or are they just letting them burn?
I think they're active efforts, and I think it just depends on the area in terms of where the resources are. But it's you can look at Canada's website. They actually they have a map of where each one is. They have information about how this compares to other years, and so it's certainly up there in terms of the scale of it as large as they've seen.
Does Canada have anything similar to the U.S.? The thing that comes to mind is like the National Guard, right? Or these wildfire units that go pour into an area. Do they have something like that?
I don't know what their equivalent to the Guard would be, but I knew that they do have a coordinated. They have like a coordination between the various jurisdictions, local, provincial, as they would call it in Canada, and federal. But there's no like centralized, like the wildfire agency, which is I think what the head of the Fire Chiefs Association was hoping to start that conversation of just something that could streamline the coordination in his mind a little bit better.
Right. Their job is wildfires, not I do this province and then, if there's a wildfire, me and 5 other departments go together.
Yeah.
This letter from the representative, the most recent that we're here talking about, is it asking for immediate action or a response? And has any of that happened?
Yeah, the letter to the IJC and the EPA, basically it asked the IJC to do like an investigation of just exactly what the management practices are and asking for more information about if Canada is meeting the standards to be able to stop this. And then with the EPA actually asking for more air quality testing. So asking them to do testing in Minnesota and just to get a little more information from the U.S. side about just exactly the scale of this for us, which we have a lot of that information, but something more federal is what they were hoping for.
Hoping that they work together, these two agencies, and is their willingness to do so?
I don't know how that would work. If it would be like, the IJC is most people probably have never even heard of it.
I haven't.
Only reason I knew about it is I used to work out in Buffalo, New York, and they have a lot of the commissioners have a lot of jurisdiction over Great Lakes and stuff.
Okay.
So that would impact Minnesota too, but I remember hearing about that because if there was flooding or anything, that would come over from Canada, they would deal with that. But it's not an agency that a lot of people would necessarily know about, but it was Americans and Canadians that are on the commission together.
I asked just because looking for practical solutions, practical work being done instead of accusations. And I'm not accusing any lawmaker of accusing someone of something else. It's just letters going across. We see that within our own Congress, right? And it doesn't do a lot for those of us living in the world. You and I have kids. My kid can't go outside at daycare for these reasons. Can't go camping, can't go up north. Stuff like that. So this is looking at more practical solutions and getting, pen to paper.
Yeah, and we'll see. I reached out to the IJC just to see if they would have a response to the letter. Haven't gotten anything. The EPA at least confirmed that they have it and they're reviewing it. But there's been a lot in a lot of the Canadian federal government. Obviously, this is something that is going to be a pressing political concern for them to address as well. So,
all right. Well, that's the latest on the wildfires or the response or lack thereof and how it affects Minnesotans from here. Thanks for joining us on Breaking the News Plus on this Monday evening. I'll see you tomorrow.